So this morning, we heard highlights from our dialogue series that led to today's summit. We learned about common barriers and themes, and now it's time to turn our attention to opportunities. So to inspire us, I'm delighted to welcome Patrick Holden. Patrick is an organic dairy farmer and a pioneer in organic movements since the 1970s. He's the founder and CEO of the Sustainable Food Trust and currently leads a task force on measuring land use sustainability for the Sustainable Markets Initiative. Welcome, Patrick.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I am Patrick Holden. I'm a farmer from Wales, and I'd just like to start by saying that I think it's an amazing gathering, and well done to the organising team for bringing this together and for all the people who have contributed already, which I found extremely inspiring. And I think just to have this event here at the FAO is a landmark bit of progress, because there are people, including people within the FAO, who worked here for many, many years, and the results of all their work has borne fruit in this coming together. And hopefully it'll be a bit of a turning point in the momentum and the influence that true cost accounting has on the global community. So well done, everyone who did that. And I've certainly benefited not only from many of the speeches this morning, but also just meeting people, old friends, new friends, and making contact. I guess everybody here will have their own work to do to take away from this event. But in particular, I think I want to focus on the areas which I think I can work on personally. And I thought I would start on that by talking about, firstly, my role as a farmer. I have been farming for 50 years in Wales, and just to demonstrate the fact that I do go back a very long way, this is the first picture on our Holden Farm Dairy Instagram, and it features me as a hippie back to the lander in 1973 on an international tractor, B276, if you're a tractor nerd, with milk churns. And when we started our dairy farm back in 1973, we were still milking into churns. So we have our farming experience, my farming experience has spanned 50 years. And right from the start, we wanted to farm in harmony with nature. We had no idea about externalities. We had no idea about the impact of agriculture on climate change, or we did have an idea about biodiversity and nature. And I think that was one of the drivers that took us back to the land, along with a social wish to farm in a community. So two of the three, the carbon thing I didn't understand that. We didn't understand that. But we did understand the nature and the social bits. So we set out to produce food in harmony with nature. And our aim still is to produce as much food as we can from the hill which we farm, which is today around 300 acres, without negatively impact on the balance sheet of nature, which we forgot to measure. And unfortunately, we haven't measured the impact of our farming system over all that time. And I'll come back to that, which is most unfortunate. But I think the impact of our farming system on food outcomes is where I would like to start, because after 50 years, during which time we've used no fertilizer whatsoever, no chemical fertilizers. Of course, we've used fertilizers, producing as much food as we can within our self-circulating, sustainable, hopefully circular farming system, I think has been very positive on soil. From the soil records we've got, it looks as though we've increased our soil carbon to the point where we might actually be carbon negative. In other words, carbon sequestration in our mainly grasslands through regenerative grazing systems more than offsets the emissions of the animals. Our employment is really good. We employ 5 people. We make cheese from all our milk. We've got a 90-cow dairy herd, and we think that our social impacts are tremendous. We employ 5 people in the cheese dairy, and we've developed a lot of skills. We produce cheese which is reassuringly expensive, so expensive, in fact, that it was subject to the great cheese heist, which some of you might have read about, where we had, or through Neil's Yard Dairy, we had a lot of cheese stolen. And the value that was put on that cheese, which you could say is a sort of intuitive true cost accounting exercise, was so great that some Machiavellian people who organised the heist chose to steal it. And Neal's Yard Dairy had to pay £360,000 to the suppliers, of which we were one, for the value of that cheese, which was kind of a reflection of its social, climate and nature value, although I don't think the people who stole the cheese realised that. We also produce carrots for schools in Wales. And I think through the carrot production, the carrots we've had analysed for their nutritional content, and it was really good. So, vegetables are not just vegetables in nutrition terms. It depends on how they're grown. Soil health is a key factor. And the Welsh government have now asked us, this is wearing my SFT hat now, to do a social externalities audit on the positive social impact of growers in Wales, which I think is an indication that our social benefits are significant. And also we've developed a threshing barn on the farm as an education centre, which I think is another positive externality relating to social, where we've had 45 events on our farm in the last 2.5 years, bringing together lots of schools and other people to learn about the story behind their food. But despite that, and this is the negative bit, we are surrounded in West Wales, and I think I'm speaking for anybody anywhere on the planet at the moment, by farmers who are extractive, who are producing food at great cost to the climate, to the destruction of biodiversity, and delivering negative social impacts through no fault of the farming community, but simply because it pays better to farm that way. And that's why it's so important to get this embedded true cost accounting framework in as far as possible throughout the world. And we've been involved since about 2011 with true cost accounting as an organisation, the Sustainable Food Trust. But we realised incrementally that it was important not just to monetize the impacts of different farming systems on climate, nature and social outcomes, but also to measure using a common framework, which is why since about 2016, the Sustainable Food Trust, as Adele mentioned earlier, has been working on the Global Farm Metric, which is our contribution towards harmonizing the way in which we measure the impacts of different farming systems. And I'm involved, as was mentioned in the introduction, with the Sustainable Markets Initiative, which the then Prince Charles brought together in 2020 at Davos, to organise collections of the most influential CEOs in the business community throughout the world, not just in food and farming, but every sector, to see what they could do to address the climate and nature crises. And I've been involved with the Agribusiness Task Force, and our aim is to try to get pilots going where farmers measure the impact of different farming systems over time and record data, which then is a precondition to allow the money to flow. I was talking to Volker Engelsmann, who I think is speaking later in this conference, earlier today, and he was saying, we just need to get on with this. There's money out there in the investment community that wants to come in to support farming systems which deliver these benefits. But my impression is that until and unless we harmonise the way in which we measure, and we make sure that we measure from the farm up and not just aerial data, which are averages of typical farm system impacts, we're not going to inject sufficient confidence in the business community to unleash the amounts of money which would turn the dial. And what I mean by that is that if it paid better, if you're currently an extractive farmer producing food in damaging ways through no fault of your own because you're just following the money, if we could get a combination of the application of the polluter pays principle, which would make farmers financially accountable for their negative impacts, that's probably the more difficult thing to do. As Andrea said this morning, governments are worried about food prices, even though the pricing system is dishonest, which we've already heard this morning. The fact is, if they're going to do anything which makes food more expensive, they're going to be reluctant to do that. And yet that is what has to happen, because if you use nitrogen fertilizer and pesticides, you are causing great damage. And I'm surrounded by mega dairy farmers who've got rid of all the small family farms because it pays better to farm in that way. So we really do need to get enough money to move the dial. It won't be governments alone that can do this. It has to be a coalition between governments and the investment sector and other organisations and stakeholders who have an interest, not least utilities, banks who have Scope 3 emission reduction targets, etc., etc. So can we do this? Can we develop a common, harmonised and holistic framework which includes impacts on human health, as we heard from Lauren earlier. If you believe the stats, 70% of the negative externalities arising from our current farming and food systems are negative health impacts, so we have to include the social dimension. Can we get this framework, harmonised framework, in place so that we can unleash this potential tide of money to make the change that's necessary? I think we must, and I think we can. And I do think that this gathering might just be a turning point in achieving that. I'll make a couple more remarks. I've been very involved with the development of the organic movement, as I said. I actually was involved in drafting the world's first draft of the livestock standards back in the 80s. But if you look at the progress that's been made by the organic movement and sector and market, if you're really generous, with a few national exceptions, it's no more than 5% of the total market. And I would put the main reason down to a combination of the price, which is just too big a premium for normal people to afford, and the lack of public understanding of the benefits of organic farming. And I believe that the antidote to that is to measure. So if you take our farming system, I admitted at the beginning that I do not know the impact of my farming system on climate, nature, and social outcomes. But if I was to measure and collect data, and I was to turn that into a sustainability score, which could be on food labels, then the customers who buy our carrots and our cheese would know that it had a high sustainability score, if it did, which of course it may or may not. But if we could do that with all foods, then there's a big discussion at the moment going on about whether regenerative agriculture is part of the problem or part of the solution. And I think it's polarizing the farming community, which is very sad, because you could argue that if farmers throughout the world are going regen, even if it is a bit light, which it is in many cases, it's still a step in the right direction. So how do you stop greenwash? I think the answer again is measurement and then monetization. Because if we could demonstrate through measurement that some regenerative farming systems work better than others, and possibly, this may not be true, that organic farming systems will deliver more climate, social and nature benefits than any other farming systems, and we could get a trusted score which was equally applied to regenerative products and all products actually, regardless of what system of farming, then we would provide the public and governments with the information that is needed to finance the agricultural transition. And God knows, I hope we can speed it up through this event, because it really is a critically important thing. Agriculture is by far and away the largest land use on planet Earth. We all flew here, or I did anyway, and if you look down from a plane, what's happening on planet Earth? It's farmed. So farms currently are part of the problem. We need to make them part of the solution. Thanks very much.